Hello everyone and welcome to episode 16 of the Layton Fitness podcast. Now in today's episode we're going to be discussing meal plans, why in my opinion the average meal plan is worthless, especially within the context I'm going to give, and how in my opinion there's a better approach to long-term sustainable success for fat loss or muscle growth. First, it's important to note some of the negatives of the average meal plan. I personally think the biggest issue with this average meal plan is this concept that your calories and macronutrient requirements are static. As I've discussed in detail on some other podcasts, for you to either make fat loss or muscle gain progress, these figures are going to be ever changing subject to your progress. So for example, if your goal is fat loss, you're going to be hitting fat loss plateaus along the way. Therefore, just say for example, if you have this average meal plan, you stick to everything listed to the absolute T, there will be a stage where you'll need to make a change, whether you need to drop calories or increase expenditure via cardio. Conversely, if your goal is muscle gain, again the same principle, calories for the most part are going to be slowly increasing. Therefore, that's my number one biggest issue with the average meal plan is, fair enough, it may get you to a certain point, but this misunderstanding that these calorie macronutrient targets are ever changing subject to your progress is a real big issue in my opinion. One of the other big issues is it's almost like you're boxed into a certain list of foods. So let me give you an example. You're on a meal plan right now, you've got the list of foods, you've got your 7 days meals all laid out for you. What if you were to go away on holiday or away on business or away from your home environment, and let's say for example the foods on the meal plan are not available to you? Would you know how to interchange those foods to match up the protein, carb, fat, calorie targets? I would argue most people wouldn't be able to if they've just got the nuts and bolts meal plan. So this is a big issue because in my opinion it doesn't teach long-term success, it doesn't really teach the process, it doesn't teach you how to interchange foods to meet those same macronutrient and calorie targets. It can potentially also create a unhealthy relationship with food in the sense that almost to a smaller degree how successful say Herbalife or Bodybuilding have been for the female market, having a meal plan and seeing some progress almost creates this reliance on these X foods to get you to your goals. So in my opinion, one of the biggest successes for Herbalife, Bodybuilding, just to clarify, I don't advocate any of these, but the reason why I think they're so successful is because people achieve results on them, but they associate the result with the Bodybuilding or the Herbalife, not the fact that they were just in an energy deficit and they could have created that via just decreasing calories and or increasing expenditure. And the same goes with the meal plan. People get results on whatever, chicken and rice 6 times a day, and they believe these foods are somehow magic and these are the only foods that can get them their results. And as I mentioned, this creates an unhealthy relationship with food because you get to a point where you're eliminating other foods unnecessarily because you believe these are the only foods that quote unquote work for you. Whereas it's more of a case of you could potentially interchange these foods to meet the same calorie and macronutrient targets rather than the quote unquote foods themselves. So as I mentioned so many times in some of my previous videos, no food is good or bad. It's all dependent on the dosage of that food within an individual's diet. Therefore, by eliminating foods unnecessarily is just ridiculous. However, with the caveat, if you have certain foods you're allergic to, obviously by default you'll be eliminating this. But that's another big issue, it almost forces you to eliminate other foods and only include a small list of foods. It doesn't really allow any variety, flexibility. As I said, if you're away from those certain foods, you're away from your home environment, you don't really have an understanding of how to interchange foods correctly. Another big issue, for example, with myself and my coaching clients and personal training clients, what I usually do is I'll have macronutrient targets and I'll also give example meal plans within that as well. So I almost use a combination of the two, but I still have the structure of the macronutrient calorie targets, and therefore that allows me to make changes. So for example, if I drop carbohydrates or increase carbohydrates, the individual I'm working with would understand what I'm talking about because they're tracking their absolute calorie macronutrient targets as well. They're not just blindly following a meal plan. And that's another example. Almost it takes away any learning whatsoever, because it's more about, okay, I just blindly eat these foods, just blindly follow the plan without really understanding exactly how the process works. And even though that may not seem an issue for the short term, as I'm going to discuss further down the podcast, is this skill really is the key skill. If you understand how to track food intake correctly and essentially manipulate these targets to moving close to your muscle gain or fat loss targets, honestly, this will serve you for the rest of your life, because you have an understanding of how to manipulate those factors to achieve a certain result. Most people don't know how to do that. So what would be my better suggestion? In my personal opinion, tracking food intake is the way to go, in addition to potentially having some example meal plans as well. But for those listening to this, I would firstly suggest getting the MyFitnessPal application. It's a free application. Firstly, do not follow the generic calorie macronutrient targets given because they're on government guidelines. The protein's way too low. If you've still yet to download my free ebook, if you go to jameslaytonfitness.co.uk, Layton, and there's a free ebook tab at the top, and that'll basically teach you how to set macronutrient calorie targets. Then you can plug those figures into MyFitnessPal and you can start tracking your food intake. So the reason why fitness is so valuable is it creates such a better understanding of what you're doing. As I mentioned, if you were to go away on holiday or go away on business and you're tracking calories, macronutrients, so protein, carbohydrates and fats, you would then know if the usual foods you eat aren't available to you, how to interchange other foods to essentially meet those same targets and thus get the same result. It allows a lot more variety, allows you to go on social occasions because you understand what you're doing. You know how to, as I mentioned again, interchange foods to get the same result. You're not boxed into a small list of foods, and therefore it creates a much healthier relationship with food because you realise no food is good or bad. It's more about the dosage of that food within your diet. It creates a much better long-term understanding. Like I mentioned, if you understand how to manipulate these factors to achieve a certain result, I'm guaranteed this will serve you for the rest of your life. Because, just for example, most people that follow a diet, they're just, as I mentioned, following it blindly. They don't really understand the process. They're just told to consume the supplement or eat these foods, but they don't really understand what they're actually doing. This will teach you and help give you a better understanding of what's happening. Now, for people who think this is slightly obsessive, don't think this at all, because quite often what can happen is once you've started tracking this via MyFitnessPal, you'll just have an increased awareness of how calorically dense certain foods are. You have a better eye for looking at foods and you can estimate the calories and macronutrients within a given meal. Now ideally initially you want to track it accurately, and with all my clients I'd rather track this as accurately as possible. But if you're someone who looking for a little bit of progress but doesn't want to take it too seriously, that would be a good solution. Start tracking it via MyFitnessPal. Almost train your eye of looking at foods and having a better understanding of what's actually in them, and then you can just eyeball foods and guesstimate. And at least you'll be in a better position than you would be if you wouldn't have started tracking. Again, like I mentioned above, if, for example, you were dropping carbohydrates or dropping fats, you understand how to manipulate foods to achieve that result by the end of the day. You're not just thinking, oh, just remove this food group. You actually know how to manipulate the quantities to achieve that result. So hopefully you found this useful. Hopefully you can see the benefit of tracking your food intake. You can see the disadvantages of just the average meal plan, and really strongly recommend, if you are following one of these, just to stop. It will help to a degree, but as I mentioned at the start of the podcast, these macronutrient and calorie figures are ever-changing, subject to progress. So something that just ignores that concept is just incorrect completely, and that needs to be changed. So some of my suggestions, as I mentioned above: start using MyFitnessPal, use the ebook on my website, start tracking your food intake, start learning how to interchange foods to meet your preferences, start adding a bit more variety into your diet, and at the same time still meeting those daily targets. So thank you very much, guys. Hopefully you found this useful and you can start applying this immediately. To learn more about myself, if you go to jameslaytonfitness.co.uk, so Layton, I've got all my other podcasts on there. I've got over 100 videos and blog articles. You can also sign up to that free ebook as well. Thank you very much, guys. I'll speak to you soon. Take care.